She dreamed of affection. He brought only coldness and disdain. At the altar she became a wife, and in bed she became nothing. The millionaire thought love was easy to buy until he learned the truth in the most painful way. The fine May rain fell over New York City as Amelia Reed signed the last document. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she held the pen firmly, tracing each letter of her name with the precision of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. Beside her, the lawyer reviewed the clauses for the third time, adjusting his glasses on his nose while murmuring legal terms she had already memorized. Across the polished mahogany table, Julian Sterling watched everything with the expression of a man closing yet another deal. No smile, no warmth, just the glacial efficiency of a man accustomed to turning everything into numbers and results. 12 months. That was the term stamped on the prenuptial agreement that now rested between them. 365 days of a meticulously planned farce with clauses that provided for every detail, from public appearances to the division of assets at the end of the agreement. Amelia would receive a generous sum at the end, enough to start a new life far from there, far from the debts that were suffocating her family, far from the pressure that had pushed her into that Italian leather chair in an office in the heart of Park Avenue. Julian did not look away as she signed. There was something unsettling in the way he watched her, as if he were evaluating an investment. And perhaps that was exactly it. Amelia knew her beauty had been a fundamental part of the choice. Brown hair that fell in natural waves to her waist, green eyes that contrasted with her olive skin, delicate features that photographed well. She would be the perfect wife for business magazines, for corporate dinners, for the foreign investors Julian needed to impress. A 35-year-old man, single and dedicated only to business, aroused suspicion in the international market. But a married, stable man, with a charming wife by his side, conveyed the image of reliability he so desperately needed to expand the Sterling family empire. The wedding would be held in a week, an intimate yet elegant ceremony in one of the most exclusive venues on the Upper East Side. Only close family and a few strategic partners. The press would be carefully controlled, with only 2 authorized outlets to cover the event. Everything calculated, everything measured, everything absolutely devoid of romance. When the lawyer finally concluded the meeting, Julian stood up and extended his hand to Amelia. A formal, brief, professional handshake. She reciprocated, feeling the cold of his palm against hers. He said nothing more than a dry "until next week" before leaving, taking the folder of documents with him and leaving the expensive scent of his imported cologne in the air. Amelia remained seated for a few moments after the door closed. The office was silent, only the distant sound of Park Avenue traffic penetrating through the double-paned windows. She looked at her own hands, still trembling slightly, and wondered how she had gotten here. The answer was simple and painful. The bankruptcy of her mother's small artisanal craft shop, her father's hospital bills after his heart condition, the threat of losing the house where she had grown up in Queens. And then, like a dark miracle, the proposal had arrived through a distant cousin who worked as an assistant in one of the Sterling Group's companies. A marriage of convenience, 12 months, a sum that would solve all their problems. Amelia had thought about refusing. For 3 straight nights, she had tossed and turned in bed, weighing the consequences, imagining other ways out. But there were no other ways out. There was no time. And when she looked at her mother's tired face, at her father's fragility still in recovery, the decision was no longer about her. It was about survival. The week leading up to the wedding passed in a haze of dress fittings, meetings with wedding planners, and pre-nuptial photo shoots that seemed more like advertising campaigns than celebrations of love. Amelia smiled when they told her to smile, turned her head when they told her to turn, intertwined her fingers with Julian's when the photographer asked for more intimacy. He participated in everything with the same neutral expression, as if he were fulfilling a schedule of corporate commitments. At no point did Julian show genuine interest in her. He didn't ask about her life, her tastes, her dreams. The conversations were strictly practical, almost always mediated by the wedding planner or the press officer. She would be introduced as an interior designer he had met at a charity event. The story was ready, rehearsed, prepared to be repeated for every journalist and every curious guest. The truth was that Amelia had always loved to draw. Since childhood, she had filled notebooks with sketches of rooms, furniture, decorative patterns. She dreamed of studying architecture, but her family's financial situation had never allowed it. She worked as a saleswoman in decoration stores, absorbing everything she could, studying on her own, developing an eye that her bosses recognized as a natural talent. But she had never had the chance to turn it into a career. Now, ironically, she would be presented to the world as something she had always wanted to be, but in a lie so grand it seemed to mock her dreams. The night before the wedding, Amelia was alone in the small apartment she shared with a friend in Brooklyn. Julian had made it clear that she should move into his mansion in Gramercy Park right after the ceremony. A team had already been sent to pack her belongings. She now looked at the boxes scattered around the living room, with the strange feeling of erasing her own existence. Everything she owned would fit into less than 10 boxes, a whole life reduced to objects that barely filled a corner of that modest room. Chloe, her friend and roommate, came in carrying 2 cups of tea. She sat next to Amelia on the worn-out sofa they had bought together at a thrift store years ago. "Are you sure about this, Amy?" Chloe's voice was soft but laden with concern. "There's still time to back out." Amelia held the warm cup between her hands, feeling the steam rise and moisten her face. "I can't, Chloe. You know I can't. But it's your life. It's 12 months of your life locked in a lie, living with a man who treats you like furniture. It's temporary, and in the end my family will be safe. The house will be paid off. My dad will get the treatments he needs, and I'll have a chance to start over." Chloe sighed, putting her arm around her friend's shoulders. "I just wish you didn't have to do this. You deserve real love, Amy. You deserve someone who looks at you and sees what I see, an incredible, talented, strong woman." Amelia smiled sadly. "Maybe after these 12 months, I'll have a chance to find that. For now, I need to survive." The wedding day dawned sunny, which everyone said was a good omen. Amelia didn't believe in omens. She wore the wedding dress that Julian's team had chosen, an elegant and discreet model, without exaggeration, perfect for the image they needed to project. Her hair was tied back in a sophisticated low bun, her makeup light but flawless. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked like an edited version of herself, polished for public consumption. The ceremony was exactly as planned, brief, elegant, photographed from the right angles. Julian recited the vows written by the press officer with the same intonation he would use to present quarterly results. Amelia repeated the words she had memorized, feeling each syllable weigh on her tongue. When the justice of the peace declared them officially married, Julian placed a quick formal kiss on her lips. It was like being kissed by a statue. The reception proceeded in a controlled atmosphere of cordiality. Elegant guests circulated among tables, decorated with minimalist arrangements. Champagne glasses sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Amelia smiled until her facial muscles ached, shook hands, accepted empty compliments, posed for photos next to a husband who barely touched her when there were no cameras around. It was during the reception that she met Augustus Sterling, Julian's father. A tall man with impeccably combed grey hair, bespoke suits, and an expression that wavered between contempt and indifference. He looked Amelia up and down with calculating eyes, like an auctioneer evaluating merchandise. "I hope you understand what this marriage represents for our family." His voice was deep, laden with authority. "Image is everything in business. Julian needs to be seen as stable, reliable. You play an important role in that." Amelia maintained a courteous smile, but something inside her rebelled against that tone. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Sterling." "Good." He took a sip of his whiskey. "And I hope that in due time we can also count on the expansion of the family. Heirs are essential for the continuity of the business." The words hit her like a slap. None of this was in the contract. Nothing about children, about heirs, about turning this farce into something even more permanent. She felt the blood drain from her face, but before she could respond, Julian appeared beside them. "Father, this is not the time to discuss business." His voice was firm, almost a warning. Augustus raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased with the interruption, but he backed down. Just setting expectations. With a brief nod, he moved away towards a group of investors. Julian turned to Amelia, and for the first time she saw something beyond indifference in his eyes, perhaps irritation, perhaps embarrassment. Ignore him. He has his own fantasies about how things should be. They are not part of our agreement. It was the longest conversation they had had in weeks, and yet it was filled with the coldness that characterized everything between them. Amelia just nodded, feeling a weight form in her stomach. She was beginning to understand that there were layers of complication to this arrangement that the contract could not have foreseen. When the reception finally ended, it was past midnight. Julian informed her that they would spend the night at a hotel just to keep up appearances before officially moving into the mansion the next day. In the car, driving through the still bustling streets of New York, he kept his eyes fixed on the avenue as if she weren't there. The hotel was a 5-star establishment near Central Park, discreet but luxurious. The reserved suite had a view of the park, with large windows showing the city lights twinkling in the distance. It was beautiful and absolutely impersonal, like everything else that day. Julian dropped his suit jacket on an armchair and loosened his tie. "I'm going to take a shower. You can use the other bathroom. We're leaving early tomorrow." He disappeared without waiting for a response, closing the door behind him. Amelia stood in the middle of the opulent suite, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. This was supposed to be the most special moment, the beginning of a shared journey, but all she felt was an immense, cold emptiness. She carefully took off the dress, hanging it in the suite's closet. She put on a simple nightgown she had brought in her small travel bag. She looked at the king-sized bed, impeccably made, and wondered what it would be like to share that space with a stranger. But when Julian came out of the shower, wearing only pajama pants, he didn't even look in the direction of the bed. He took a blanket from the closet and headed to the sofa on the other side of the suite. "I'll sleep here," he said without looking at her, already settling in. "I have early meetings. Try not to make noise when you wake up." That was all. No good night, no gesture of courtesy. He simply turned his back, and minutes later, his breathing indicated he had fallen asleep with the ease of someone who carries no weight on their conscience. Amelia lay down on the huge, cold bed, pulling the comforter up to her chin. The tears came without warning, silent and bitter, wetting the expensive pillow as she bit her lip to keep from making a sound. This was her wedding night, the beginning of her married life, and she was completely, devastatingly alone. The next morning, the move to the mansion in Gramercy Park happened with the efficiency of a military operation. Julian had left before she even woke up, leaving only a note informing her that the moving team would be there at 9 o'clock. When Amelia arrived at the mansion, an imposing 3-story building with meticulously manicured gardens, her belongings had already been taken to one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. Not the master bedroom, evidently. That belonged to Julian. Hers was at the end of the hall, a spacious and well-decorated room, but unequivocally separate. The message was clear. They would share an address. A surname, a public sham. But nothing more. A middle-aged housekeeper who introduced herself as Mrs. Celia showed her around the house. The large, modern kitchen, the living room with its double-height ceiling, the office where Julian spent most of his time when he was home, the library, the gym, the heated pool in the indoor garden. It was all impeccable, but cold. A house that looked more like a showroom than a home. "Mr. Sterling usually leaves very early and comes back late," Mrs. Celia explained as they walked. "He rarely has lunch at home. He dines here only when he has work commitments. You'll be quite lonely, I imagine." There was a genuine kindness in the housekeeper's voice, as if she understood the strangeness of the situation even without knowing the details. Amelia thanked her for the information, and when she was finally alone in the room that was now hers, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The boxes with her belongings were stacked in the corner. She began to unpack them slowly, finding objects that told the story of her life. Family photos, old books, small mementos, and then at the bottom of the last box, her fingers touched something familiar. She pulled it out and her heart clenched. It was her sketchbook. pages and pages filled with sketches, projects, drawn dreams. Rooms that never existed outside her imagination. Interiors that blended functionality and beauty. Spaces she created in her mental refuge when reality became too heavy. She flipped through it slowly, recognizing in each line a part of herself that remained untouched by everything that was happening. She hid the sketchbook in the nightstand drawer as if it were a precious secret she needed to protect. In that house that was, not hers in that life she had not chosen, that sketchbook was the only thing that still truly belonged to her. The first few days dragged on in a monotonous and lonely routine. Julian left before dawn and returned after dusk. When they were home at the same time, he would shut himself in his office, emerging only for quick, silent meals. There were no conversations. There was no interest. She was a ghost-like presence in that mansion, wandering through silent hallways, exploring empty rooms, counting the hours of solitude. But the real farce took place outside. In less than 2 weeks, they had already been photographed together at 3 public events. Julian transformed in those moments, becoming attentive, smiling, lightly touching her back, holding her hand. For the cameras, they were the perfect couple. The successful businessman and his charming wife, united in a partnership that promised stability and a future. Amelia learned to play her part perfectly. She smiled at the right moments, leaned slightly towards him when they spoke with investors, laughed at the unfunny jokes he told to impress clients. It was like being in a permanent theater, wearing a mask she could only remove when she returned to the solitude of her room. One of those nights, after a particularly long corporate dinner at Per Se, Julian surprised her by striking up a conversation in the car. "You did well today. Your comments on sustainable design impressed Mr. Nakamura. He's considering investing in our green construction project." Amelia turned to him, surprised that he had noticed. "I just said what I think. Sustainability should be a priority in any contemporary project." He observed her briefly before turning his eyes back to the avenue. "Do you actually understand this? Or did you just research it before the event?" The question had a slightly accusatory tone, as if he didn't believe she could have genuine knowledge on the subject. Amelia felt irritation rise within her. "I do understand it. I've always been interested in architecture and design. I just never had the opportunity to study it formally." Something in his expression changed, a brief curiosity crossing his eyes. "Why not?" Amelia hesitated, not knowing why she was sharing this with someone who barely seemed to consider her human. "My family could never afford it. I had to start working early. Sometimes dreams have to wait." Julian didn't reply, but she noticed he seemed to be processing that information. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, less hostile perhaps. Or maybe she was just desperate for any crumb of humanity in this situation. But the next day everything was back to normal. He left early as always, and she was alone as always. The only difference was that she now found herself thinking about that brief conversation, that fleeting moment when he seemed to really listen to her. The weeks piled up. Amelia developed her own routine to maintain her sanity. She would wake up early and walk through Washington Square Park, breathing in the fresh morning air while trying to remember who she was before this marriage. She would return to the mansion and spend hours in the library, reading everything she could find on architecture, design, and art. She would lunch alone, usually chatting with Mrs. Celia, who became her only constant companion. In the afternoon, when the sun streamed through the high windows of her room, Amelia would open her sketchbook and lose herself in her creations. She drew obsessively, filling pages with increasingly elaborate projects. It was her way of resisting, of keeping alive the part of her that this situation was trying to erase. One afternoon, she was so engrossed in a particularly complex drawing of a living room that integrated natural elements with modern design that she didn't hear the door open. Only when a shadow fell across the page did she look up, startled. Julian was standing at the entrance to her room, his tie loose, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up. He was looking at her with a strange expression. "Sorry, I knocked, but you didn't answer. I needed to get some documents I left here by mistake yesterday." His voice was neutral, but his eyes shifted to the open sketchbook on her lap. Amelia quickly closed the sketchbook, hugging it against her chest, as if protecting something precious. Julian frowned slightly but didn't comment. He found the documents he was looking for on the dresser and turned to leave. At the door, however, he hesitated. "You draw?" The question caught her off guard. "Sometimes." He nodded slowly, as if considering something. And then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Amelia remained motionless for long minutes, her heart beating fast. It was just a simple question, but coming from him it seemed to carry a greater weight. For the first time, Julian had shown curiosity about something she did, something that was hers, and that, in a strange and confusing way, left her unsettled. That night, for the first time in weeks, Julian had dinner at home. There was no event, no commitment. He simply appeared in the dining room as Mrs. Celia was serving the meal and sat at the table. Amelia, caught by surprise, took her usual place on the other side of the long, wooden table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of cutlery against porcelain filling the room. Then Julian spoke, without looking up from his plate. "We have an important event next week, a launch for a new company development. It will be heavily covered by the media. I need you to be impeccable." Amelia let her fork rest on the plate. "As always." He finally looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes, an intensity she hadn't seen before. "This one is particularly important. Augustus will be there, and he will be critical of every detail." "I understand." She held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. "I will continue to play my part well." A muscle tensed in his jaw. "It's not just that." He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "This project is crucial for the company's expansion. If we secure the right investors at this event, I can finally rid myself of my father's constant interference in the business." It was the first time Julian had shared something personal, something that went beyond the professional facade. Amelia felt curiosity awaken, but she knew she shouldn't press. "I'll do whatever is necessary." He nodded briefly and went back to eating. But when he finished his meal and stood up to leave, he paused beside her chair. "Thank you." The word came out low, almost reluctant, but it was there. Amelia watched him climb the stairs, disappearing down the second-floor hallway, and felt something subtly shift inside her. Julian was still cold, distant, impossible. But for the first time she had glimpsed a crack in that impenetrable armor. And against her better judgment, against all logic, she found herself wanting to understand what lay behind that icy mask. The event was to take place at the Seagram Building, one of New York's most emblematic architectural icons. Julian had chosen the location strategically, knowing that the modernist beauty of the building designed by Mies van der Rohe would add prestige to the launch of Sterling Properties' new development. It would be a gala night, with over 200 guests, including international investors, representatives from the specialized media, and, of course, Augustus Sterling, observing his son's every move with his critical and calculating eyes. Amelia spent the 3 days leading up to the event in intense preparation. Julian's image team showed up at the mansion with options for dresses, jewelry, and accessories. Everything was carefully selected to convey discreet elegance, sophistication, without ostentation. The chosen dress was a long navy blue gown with a subtle neckline and a perfect drape that flattered her silhouette without exaggeration. The jewelry was delicate, just small diamond earrings and a thin white gold bracelet. Her hair would be down, falling in natural waves over her shoulders. On the morning of the event, Julian did something unusual. He knocked on her bedroom door around 10 o'clock, when he would normally have been at the office. For hours, Amelia answered wearing only a robe, her hair still wet from the shower. He quickly averted his gaze, as if the sight of her in casual attire was uncomfortable. "Sorry to bother you. I brought you something." He held out a dark blue velvet box. Amelia took the box hesitantly, opening it slowly. Inside was a delicate necklace, a thin white gold chain with a leaf-shaped pendant crafted with tiny diamonds that caught the morning light. It was discreet, but absolutely stunning, and different from anything the image team had selected. There was something personal in this choice. "It was my mother's," Julian said, keeping his gaze fixed on a point beyond her shoulder. "She passed away when I was 15. My father keeps her jewelry in a safe, but I took this necklace. I think it will go well with the dress you're wearing tonight." Amelia looked up at him, too surprised to hide her emotion. "Julian, I can't wear this. It's too valuable. It has meaning to you." "That's exactly why I want you to wear it." He finally met her eyes, and there was a vulnerability in his gaze she had never seen before. "My mother would have liked you. She always said that the most beautiful things are those with a purpose, not just an appearance. This necklace has a purpose tonight." Before Amelia could respond, he was already walking away down the hall. "I'll see you at 7. The driver will be ready." She stood at the door, holding the box against her chest, feeling the weight of that gesture. Julian had shared something intimate, something that touched on old wounds, and in doing so, he had subtly changed the dynamic between them. It was no longer just a contract. There were layers of humanity beginning to emerge from beneath the coldness. The hours leading up to the event passed in a mix of anxiety and preparation. The beauty team arrived at 4 in the afternoon, turning Amelia's room into a makeshift salon. Makeup, hair, nails, every detail was adjusted to perfection. When she finally put on the gown and the necklace, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror and saw a woman who seemed to belong to that world of luxury and appearances. But beneath the polished surface, she was still the same Amelia who drew in secret, who walked alone in the parks, who counted the days until the end of that agreement. Julian was waiting for her in the entrance hall when she came down the stairs. He was wearing an impeccable tuxedo, his dark hair combed back, his recent shave making his face look even more angular. When he saw Amelia descending, something flickered in his eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or just satisfaction at seeing that the investment in her image was paying off. "You look perfect," he said simply, offering his arm. In the car, the tension was palpable. Julian reviewed notes on his tablet, occasionally murmuring phrases that seemed to be part of the speech he would give during the event. Amelia looked out the window, watching New York pass in a blur of lights and movement. The city was alive on that Friday night, people filling bars and restaurants, living their real lives while she headed to another night of performance. The Seagram building was spectacularly lit when they arrived. Photographers swarmed the entrance, flashes firing as soon as the car stopped. Julian got out first, walked around the vehicle, and opened the door for Amelia with a chivalrous gesture that she knew was purely theatrical. But when she placed her hand in his to get out of the car, he squeezed her fingers lightly, a quick gesture that could have been mistaken for simple courtesy, but she felt it carried something more. They ascended the building's famous lobby, surrounded by security and assistants, while journalists shouted questions and cameras followed them. Julian responded with calculated smiles and brief waves, keeping Amelia close with a firm hand on her back. To an outside observer, they were the personification of the perfect couple, united and harmonious. The event hall at the top of the building was filled with elegant people circulating among displays, showcasing the new development project. It was a set of sustainable residential towers with state-of-the-art technology in energy efficiency and a design that integrated green spaces. The models were impressive, and Amelia found herself genuinely interested in the architectural details. Julian was immediately approached by groups of investors, and she remained by his side, smiling politely, participating in superficial conversations about art, design, and urban trends. But then a deep, familiar voice sounded behind her. "Amelia, my dear, you look enchanting." She turned to find Augustus Sterling, imposing in his tuxedo, observing her with those cold eyes that always made her feel as if she were being evaluated and found wanting. Beside him was a stunning blonde woman, several years his junior, wearing a red dress that was too tight and jewelry that was too ostentatious. "Mr. Sterling," Amelia greeted with a nod. "This is Veronica, my companion for the evening." Augustus made the introductions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Veronica, this is Amelia, Julian's wife." The two women greeted each other with the polite coldness of those who recognize opposing territories. Veronica was everything Amelia was not: bold, flashy, clearly comfortable. In that world of power and money, there was something predatory in the way she looked around, as if she were always calculating her next move. Julian finally noticed his father's presence and approached. "Father, Veronica." His tone was cordial but tense. "Good of you to come." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Augustus replied, taking a sip of his whiskey. "After all, I need to make sure my investment is being well managed." The jab did not go unnoticed. Julian maintained a neutral expression, but Amelia felt the tension radiating from him. "I'm sure you'll be impressed with the presentation." "We'll see," Augustus smiled coldly. "By the way, I hear there's no news of an heir on the way. It's been almost 2 months of marriage. Is everything all right between you two?" The question was inappropriate and invasive, asked in a casual tone but loaded with insinuation. Amelia felt the blood rush to her face, but before she could respond, Julian stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her in a protective gesture. "Our personal life is not a topic for public discussion, Father. Especially not here, not now." Augustus raised his hands in a mock surrender, just showing natural interest. After all, the continuation of the family is important. Julian didn't reply. He simply took Amelia's hand and led her away, leaving Augustus and Veronica behind. She could feel the contained anger in the way he held her hand, in the rigidity of his shoulders. "Sorry about that," he murmured when they were far enough away. "He has no boundaries." "You don't need to apologize," Amelia replied softly. "I was expecting something like this." Julian stopped in a quieter corner of the hall, turning to face her. But there was something more in his eyes now, something beyond simple embarrassment. There was revolt, perhaps, weariness, a vulnerability he rarely allowed to be seen. He's always been like this, controlling, invasive, obsessed with legacy and appearances. That's why I agreed to this marriage, you know, to finally have something that is mine without his constant interference. Amelia watched him in silence, seeing for the first time the man behind the mask of the cold executive. "I understand more than you think. We all make difficult choices for reasons that aren't always easy to explain." Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding that transcended words. But then an assistant approached, warning that it was time for the opening speech, and Julian reverted to the confident businessman, leading Amelia back to the center of the hall. His speech was flawless. Julian spoke with passion about sustainability, about the future of cities, about building spaces that not only housed people, but improved the quality of urban life. There was genuine knowledge in his words, a commitment that went beyond numbers and profits. Amelia found herself admiring not just what he said, but how he said it. There was fire there, an intensity he carefully hid in his day-to-day life. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Investors approached, interested, wanting to know more. Julian received them with his characteristic professional courtesy, but always kept Amelia close, including her in conversations, asking for her opinions on design aspects. It was during one of these conversations that it happened. A group was discussing the integration of green spaces in projects, and one of the Japanese investors asked about the concept of biophilia in contemporary architecture. Julian began to answer, but Amelia, without thinking, added, "Biophilia goes beyond just adding plants to environments. It's about reconnecting people with nature in an organic way, creating spaces that respect our evolutionary instincts to seek natural light, fresh air, natural elements. Studies show that biophilic environments reduce stress, increase productivity, and improve overall well-being." The group looked at her with renewed interest. Julian was silent, observing her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The Japanese investor smiled broadly. "Mrs. Sterling, you clearly understand the subject. Your husband is a lucky man to have a wife who shares his vision." Amelia felt her face flush, but she maintained her composure. "I've always been interested in how spaces affect people. Good architecture isn't just aesthetics, it's psychology." The conversation continued, but Amelia noticed that Julian didn't take his eyes off her. There was something changed in his gaze, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a carefully chosen accessory, but as a person with depth, knowledge, and her own value. When the group finally dispersed, Julian gently pulled her aside. "Where did that come from?" What? That knowledge about biophilia, about environmental psychology. Did you study that? Amelia hesitated, unsure if she should share. I've read a lot. I've always been fascinated by how design can influence emotions. And I've designed projects for years, even if only on paper. Projects, he repeated slowly, like the drawings in your sketchbook. She nodded, surprised that he had paid attention to that detail weeks ago. They're just personal studies, nothing professional. Julian was silent for a moment, clearly processing something. Then, completely unexpectedly, he asked, "Would you like to see the company's projects? The technical drawings, the blueprints, the whole creative process behind the developments?" Amelia blinked, confused. "Why are you offering me this? Because maybe you have valuable insights. And because—" He hesitated, as if the next words were difficult to admit. "Because I realize I've underestimated you." Before she could answer, Augustus appeared again, this time with a group of men in suits who were clearly important investors. The personal conversation had to be interrupted, and Julian returned to professional mode. But something had changed. For the rest of the night he included her more actively in conversations, asked for her opinions, valued her contributions. To outside observers it just seemed like a husband proud of his intelligent wife. But Amelia knew it was more than that. It was respect beginning to bloom, where before there had only been indifference. The event stretched on past midnight. When they finally got into the car to return to the mansion, they were both exhausted. Amelia took off her high heels with a sigh of relief, and Julian loosened his tie, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of fatigue. "You were incredible today," he said, breaking the silence. "The investors were impressed. Nakamura has already indicated he wants to join the project." "I'm glad it worked out." Julian turned to her in the back seat of the car. "It wasn't just about it working out. You made a difference. Your contributions, your knowledge, the way you connected with people, it made a real difference." There was a sincerity in his voice that touched something deep inside Amelia. "Thank you for giving me the space to participate." He held her gaze for a moment, too long to be casual. "The necklace looks perfect on you." Amelia brought her hand to the pendant on her neck. "It's beautiful, and it means a lot that you trusted me with this. My mother believed that beautiful objects should be used, not kept away, that they come to life when they are part of someone's life." Julian looked out the window, but his voice carried a contained emotion. "She would have liked to see you wearing this tonight." "What was your mother like?" Amelia asked softly, sensing he was open to sharing. Julian was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he began to speak, his voice low as if telling a secret. "She was everything my father isn't. Kind, creative, full of life. She loved art, music, people. The mansion was full of laughter when she was alive, and then she got sick, cancer. It took less than a year. I was 15 and I watched my father turn into an empty shell obsessed with work and control. I don't think he ever got over the loss. And I never got over what he became. I'm so sorry, Julian. It must have been devastating to lose your mother so young." He finally looked at her again, and there was an old sadness in his eyes. "It changed everything. It changed who I became. My father pushed me into business, taught me that emotion is weakness, that control is everything. And I believed him for a long time. I believed him. And now? Now I'm starting to question a lot of things," he said simply. The car stopped in front of the mansion, and the driver opened the door for them. The walk to the entrance was made in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Less heavy, perhaps, less hostile. In the entrance hall, Julian stopped at the base of the staircase. "Amelia, about what I said earlier, about you seeing the company's projects, I was serious. In fact, we're starting a new development. Something focused on sustainable housing for the middle class. I could use a creative eye, someone who understands design but also people. I'd like you to participate, not as my wife, but as a collaborator." Amelia stared at him, shocked. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You have talent, knowledge, and a perspective that most of our consultants lack. And it would be an opportunity for you to develop that creative side you keep hidden in a sketchbook. She felt emotion tighten her throat. It was the first time in months that someone had seen value in her beyond her appearance. The first time someone had recognized her dreams as something more than naive fantasies. "I would love that," she said, and the smile that lit up her face was genuine. Julian smiled back, and it was a different smile from the ones he used in public. It had warmth, it had life. "Great. We'll start on Monday. I'll have the team prepare the materials." They went up the stairs side by side, and when they reached the hallway where their rooms were at opposite ends, Julian hesitated. "Good night, Amelia." "Good night, Julian." She entered her room and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. She carefully removed the necklace, placing it back in the velvet box, and then slowly undressed, reliving every moment of the night. Something fundamental had changed between them. Julian was no longer just the cold man who had bought her for a business deal. He was human, wounded, complex, and against all her better judgment, against all the warnings her rational mind screamed, Amelia was beginning to care. The following days were different. Julian didn't disappear into the shadows of work as he used to. For the first time since she had moved into the mansion, he had dinner at home regularly, not every night, but several times a week. And during these meals they talked about architecture, about the city, about art. They discovered common tastes that neither of them expected. They both loved classic cinema. They both hated crowded places, but loved the energy of the city. They both had a complicated relationship with their families. On the Monday after the event, Julian kept his word. When Amelia came down for breakfast, he was waiting for her with a folder full of blueprints, sketches and proposals for the new sustainable housing project. They sat in the library, spreading the documents over the large work table, and for the first time since the wedding they worked together on something real. Amelia was surprised by how easily the ideas flowed. She pointed out problems in the layouts, suggested improvements in the distribution of spaces, proposed creative solutions to maximize natural light. Julian listened attentively, taking notes, occasionally disagreeing but always with respect, always open to considering her point of view. "You really have an eye for this," he commented after a few hours, looking at the sketches she had made over the original plans. "These adjustments you've suggested would significantly increase functionality without increasing costs. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need." Amelia felt pride well up in her chest. For years her ideas had been trapped in a sketchbook, invisible to the world. Now, for the first time, they were being seen, valued, considered for real implementation. Weeks passed in this new dynamic. Amelia became an official part of the project's consulting team, working directly with architects and designers. She discovered she had a knack for the technical side, that years of self-study had indeed built a solid foundation of knowledge. But more than that, she discovered she had a voice, an opinion, value. And the more she worked with Julian, the more layers of him she uncovered. The cold, calculating man revealed himself to be someone deeply passionate about his work, who genuinely cared about the social impact of his projects. He could have focused only on luxury developments that would maximize profits, but he chose to invest in affordable, sustainable housing because he believed that good design should not be a privilege for the few. One afternoon, they were reviewing the final adjustments to the project when Julian received a call. From his tone of voice, Amelia realized it was Augustus. The conversation was brief and tense, ending with Julian hanging up with more force than necessary. "Problems?" she asked cautiously. Julian ran a hand over his face, a gesture of frustration she had learned to recognize. "My father is questioning my management. Again. He thinks I'm spending too much time on social projects and not enough on high-profit developments. He doesn't understand that sustainability and social responsibility are the future, not just passing trends." "Have you tried explaining the long-term vision to him?" "I've tried, countless times, but he's stuck in a 20th century business model. To him, success is only about how much money you accumulate, not the impact you generate." Amelia hesitated but then decided to take a risk. "Maybe he's afraid that you'll surpass his legacy, that you'll prove there's a better way of doing things." Julian looked at her with a surprised expression, as if she had articulated something he had never been able to put into words. You might be right. He's always been competitive, even with me, especially with me. That must be exhausting. It is, Julian admitted softly. It always has been. They sat in silence for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. Then Julian did something completely unexpected. He stood up, walked around the table, and sat in the chair next to Amelia, instead of returning to his place on the other side. It was a small physical change, but symbolically significant. He was choosing proximity over distance. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for listening to me, for understanding." Amelia felt her heart race at his closeness. "Whenever you need to talk, I'm here." Julian held her gaze, and there was an intensity in his eyes that made the air between them feel thicker. His hand moved as if to touch hers on the table, but then he seemed to remember something and pulled back. "We need to finish this review. The presentation to the investors is tomorrow." The moment passed, but its essence lingered between them, an unresolved tension that neither of them knew how to name. That night Amelia had trouble sleeping. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about Julian, about how things had changed between them. The contract was still there, defining the boundaries of their relationship. But within those boundaries, something real was beginning to grow. Something dangerous, because when those 12 months were over, she would have to leave. And now, for the first time, the idea of leaving brought not just relief, but also a pang of something she was afraid to name. Spring arrived in New York with its sudden showers and characteristic humid warmth. Amelia woke up each day with a strange feeling that her life had split into two parallel worlds. On one hand, the sham of the marriage continued, with public events where she and Julian played the perfect couple. On the other, there was something real developing between them, something no contract had foreseen and that both seemed to simultaneously seek and fear. It had been 4 months since the wedding. The sustainable housing project Amelia was collaborating on was taking shape, and her contribution was becoming increasingly essential. The team's architects respected her, sought her opinion, implemented her suggestions. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not just for her appearance, but for her mind, her talent, her vision. Julian had changed too. Not completely, there were still moments of distance and coldness, especially when the pressure from Augustus increased. But in recent months, he had become more present. They talked over breakfast, worked together in the afternoon, occasionally had dinner without the tension that once permeated every meal. He had started asking small questions about her life, showing genuine curiosity, and she, in turn, discovered facets of him that made him less and less the cold businessman and more a complex wounded man trying to find his own way. But everything started to change one October morning when Amelia went to an art supply store in the West Village to buy materials for a hobby she had resumed, watercolor painting. She was examining brushes when she heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Amy? Amelia Reed? Is that really you?" She turned and her heart gave an uncomfortable leap. Standing before her was Ethan Hayes, the man who had been her boyfriend for 3 years, ending the relationship shortly before her mother's shop went bankrupt. He looked different, more mature, wearing glasses he hadn't worn before, but the smile was the same, warm, genuine, lighting up a spark in his brown eyes that had always made her feel special. "Ethan," she managed to say, trying to hide her surprise. "Wow, how long has it been?" 4 years, more or less. He moved closer, and there was something so familiar about his presence that Amelia felt a wave of nostalgia. "You look beautiful. Different, but beautiful." "Thanks. You look good too." They stood there in the art supplies aisle, a strange silence hanging between them. Finally, Ethan broke the tension. "I heard you got married. To Julian Sterling, no less. I saw it in the magazines, in the news. Congratulations." There was something in his tone, a note of sadness perhaps, that made Amelia uncomfortable. "Thanks, it was all very fast." "I can imagine." He hesitated, as if debating internally whether to continue. "Amy, I know I have no right to say this after so long, but I have to. I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I was a coward." When I heard about your family's financial problems, I panicked. I thought you'd expect me to fix everything, that I couldn't handle the pressure. So I ran, and I've regretted it every day since. Amelia felt conflicting emotions rush through her. Anger for the abandonment, sadness for the loss, and something else she didn't want to name. Ethan, that was a long time ago. We're in different places now, I know. But when I saw you here, I couldn't help but think about all the conversations we had, all the plans we made. Do you remember? We were going to travel through South America. You were going to study architecture. I was going to finish my master's in economics. We had so many dreams. Dreams change, Amelia said softly, trying to maintain emotional distance. People change. Have you changed? He asked, and there was an intensity in his eyes. Because the Amy I knew didn't dream of marrying a rich businessman and living in a mansion. She dreamed of creating, of building things with meaning. She wanted to make a difference, not just exist in a world of appearances. The words hit deeper than Amelia would like to admit. How do you know what I want? You abandoned me when I needed you most. You have no right to judge the choices I've made since then. You're right. Ethan backed off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized from years ago. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to judge. It's just... He looked at her with such vulnerability that something inside Amelia trembled. I never forgot. You, Amy. I never stopped feeling like I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. Before Amelia could respond, her phone rang. It was Julian. She answered, grateful for the interruption. Hi. Her voice came out less steady than she intended. Where are you? Julian sounded slightly worried. I thought you'd be back to work on the final project presentation. I'm at the store, buying some materials. I'll be back in half an hour. Is everything okay? You sound strange. Everything's fine. See you soon. She hung up and looked at Ethan, who was watching the interaction intently. I have to go. Of course, but Amy, before you go... He took a card from his pocket. This is my number. If you ever want to talk, grab a coffee, reminisce about old times, or just talk, I'm here. Amelia took the card mechanically, not quite sure why she accepted it. Goodbye, Ethan. Bye, Amy. Take care. On the way back to the mansion, Amelia gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to process what had happened. Seeing Ethan again had brought up memories she had buried deep. Memories of a time when she was different, when her dreams seemed possible, when loving someone wasn't complicated by contracts and financial agreements, but it also made her realize something that made her uncomfortable. During those 4 months living with Julian, working alongside him, getting to know his layers, she had started to feel something. Something that went far beyond professional respect or gratitude for him giving her talent a chance to flourish. It was something dangerous, something that shouldn't exist in a marriage with an expiration date. When she arrived at the mansion, Julian was waiting for her in the library, surrounded by documents. He looked up as she entered, and his gaze seemed to scan her face with unusual attention. Did something happen? No, why do you ask? You seem disturbed. Different. Amelia forced a smile, placing the bags of materials on a chair. Just a strange day. Shall we get to work? But Julian wouldn't let it go. He stood up and approached her, maintaining a respectful distance but with penetrating eyes. Amelia, if something is bothering you, you can tell me. I'm your... He hesitated on the word. Husband. At least for now. The last phrase hung in the air between them. For now. A reminder that all of this was temporary, had an end date. Just 8 more months and she would be free to leave, free to rebuild her life far from here. So why did this idea, which once brought relief, now hurt? I ran into someone from my past, she heard herself say, without having planned to share. Someone who was important to me a few years ago. Something changed in Julian's face. His jaw tensed slightly, his eyes darkened. An ex-boyfriend? Yes. We broke up shortly before my family went through financial difficulties. He couldn't handle the pressure and ended things. And what did he want now? Julian's voice had a sharp edge she didn't recognize. To talk. To apologize, I think. I don't know exactly. It was a strange and unexpected encounter. Julian was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded abruptly. I see. He picked up his briefcase. I need to take care of a few things at the office. We can continue the review later. He left before she could respond, and Amelia was left alone in the library, confused by his reaction. Was that jealousy in his eyes? But how could it? Bay? Their marriage was a contract. They had no agreements on emotional exclusivity, only on maintaining public appearances. Julian had no right to feel jealous, and yet, the way he had left, the tension in his shoulders, the sudden coldness in his voice, all indicated that he had felt something. The following days were strange. Julian became distant again, leaving early and returning late, avoiding prolonged conversations. Their shared meals ceased. He locked himself in his office, responding to her greetings with monosyllables. It was as if they had gone back to the first few months of the marriage when she was just an irrelevant shadow in his life. Amelia tried to focus on the project, but Julian's change affected her more than she wanted to admit. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, waiting for him to enter the library while she worked, longing for the moments of connection they had built in recent weeks. But he didn't come. And the more he pulled away, the more she realized how much she had grown accustomed to his presence. It was Mrs. Celia who finally commented on the change one afternoon while they were having tea in the living room. Mr. Sterling has been very withdrawn these days, even with me, and I've worked here for 10 years. Did something happen between you two? Amelia sighed, stirring the sugar in her tea without really drinking it. I don't know, Mrs. Celia. One moment we were fine, working together, talking. The next he just shut down. The older woman observed her with wise eyes. May I say something that's none of my business? Always. I've seen many sides of Mr. Sterling over the years. The boy who lost his mother and became a scared young man, the man who closed himself off to protect his heart. And in the last few weeks I've seen something I hadn't seen in a long time. I saw him genuinely smile. I saw him eager to come home. I saw him alive. And it all changed when you arrived, Mum. Amelia felt her heart clench. Mrs. Celia, our marriage is complicated. There are aspects you don't know about. I know more than you think. The woman smiled gently. I've worked in this house for years. I saw the contract being discussed. I saw the lawyers coming and going. I'm not blind. Or deaf. I know this marriage started as a business arrangement. Amelia's eyes widened in shock. You know. I do. But I also know that feelings don't respect contracts. And I've seen the way Mr. Sterling looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I've seen the way you look at him. What started as business is turning into something else, my dear. And that scares you both. Mrs. Celia's words echoed in Amelia's mind for the rest of the day. Could it be true? Did Julian feel something for her beyond professional respect and marital convenience? And she. What did she feel exactly? Gratitude for him giving her talent a chance? Admiration for his dedication to his work? Or was it something deeper, more dangerous? That night, unable to sleep, Amelia went down to the kitchen around 2 in the morning for a glass of water. She was surprised to find a light on in the library. She approached quietly and saw Julian sitting at the work table, surrounded by papers, his head in his hands. He looked exhausted, defeated. She knocked softly on the door. Julian raised his head abruptly, and in the brief moment before, he composed his expression. She saw raw vulnerability in his eyes. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I saw the light on. I couldn't sleep, he said simply, running a hand over his face. There's a lot to deal with. Amelia entered, closing the door behind her. Can I help? Julian was silent for a moment, then sighed deeply. My father is threatening to take away my autonomy in the company. He says my choices are too risky, that I'm spending resources on projects that don't bring immediate returns. He wants me to focus only on high-profit luxury developments. And the sustainable housing project? He wants to cancel it, says it's a waste of time and money. Amelia felt anger rise in her chest, but that project could make a real difference in the lives of hundreds of families. It's innovative, sustainable, socially responsible. I know. Julian looked at her and there was so much weariness in his eyes. But he doesn't care about that. He only cares about numbers, about profit, about maintaining control. And he's using the marriage too. Says it's been months and there's still no sign of an heir. He thinks our marriage is fake. Amelia felt her blood run cold. Does he know about the contract? Not the details, but he suspects. And he's pressuring me to prove it's real, that we're really a couple. How? Julian looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He wants us to have a child. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Amelia sat down slowly in a chair, processing the words. A child. Something that was definitely not in the contract, something that would make everything infinitely more complicated. Obviously, we're not going to do that, Julian said quickly. It's not part of our agreement. I'll find another way to deal with him. And if you don't, Amelia heard herself ask, what happens to the company, to the project? He'll probably take full control, cancel everything I've built in recent years, turn the company back into a soulless money-making machine. Julian looked at her. But I'm not going to put you in that position. You've already done more than you should have by accepting this marriage. I won't ask for anything more. There was honor in those words, a decency that contrasted with the coldness he had shown at the beginning. And Amelia realized, with a clarity that frightened her, that it wasn't just respect she felt for this man. It was something deeper, more real, more impossible. Julian, she said softly, why have you been pulling away from me this week? He looked at her, and in the silence that followed, she saw an internal battle take place in his eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse, because when you mentioned that man, that ex-boyfriend who wanted to apologize, I felt something I had no right to feel. I felt jealous, Amelia. Jealous of someone from your past, of someone who knew you when you were free, when your choices were your own. And I realized that at some point in these last few months, without meaning to, without planning to, I started to forget that this is temporary. I started to forget that you're here out of obligation, not by choice. Amelia's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. What if it's not just an obligation anymore? Julian stood motionless. What are you saying? I'm saying that the last few months have changed things. For me, at least. You're no longer just the man who offered me a financial deal. You are, she hesitated, searching for the right words. You're someone I've started to admire, to respect, to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Julian slowly stood up, walking around the table until he was standing in front of her. Amelia looked up, and the intensity in his gaze made her stomach churn. Finish the sentence, he asked quietly. To care about, she whispered. I've started to care about you, Julian, in a way I shouldn't, in a way that will complicate everything when this contract ends. Julian raised his hand, hesitated, and then gently caressed her face, his fingers tracing her jawline, with a delicacy that contrasted with all the coldness he had ever shown. It's already complicated, he admitted, because I care too. More than I should, more than is wise. You came into my life as part of a business plan and became the only real thing amidst all the masks and games. Amelia placed her hand over his, keeping it against her face. What do we do now? I don't know, Julian said honestly, but I know I don't want to keep pretending you don't matter. I don't want to keep pulling away when all I want is to be close to you. Then don't pull away. They stayed like that for a moment that seemed suspended in time. Then slowly, Julian leaned in. Amelia held her breath, feeling his proximity, the warmth, the intensity. Their lips were inches apart when Julian's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He pulled back abruptly, picking up the device with tense hands. It was a message from Augustus, scheduling a meeting for the next day to discuss the future of the company. Julian closed his eyes, frustration evident in every line of his body. I have to deal with this, he said, and there was pain in his voice. Amelia, about what almost... I know, she interrupted gently. Not now. When everything is settled. Then we can figure out what this between us really means. Julian nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on her. Thank you for understanding, for being here, for being real. Always, she replied, and realized it was true. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. The meeting with Augustus was as difficult as expected, with the family patriarch pressuring Julian to make drastic changes to the company or face the consequences. Julian refused to yield, defending his vision with a firmness that impressed even the most skeptical partners. But the tension was taking its toll. He was exhausted, constantly on edge. Amelia did what she could to support him. She worked tirelessly on the sustainable housing project, ensuring every detail was perfect for the presentation to investors that could save everything. She also took on more public responsibilities, appearing at corporate events, giving interviews on sustainable design, building an image that helped solidify Julian's credibility in the market. But amidst all this, Ethan began to reappear. First it was polite messages, asking how she was, then invitations for coffee, to talk about old times. Amelia initially ignored them, but he was persistent in a gentle way that made her feel guilty for refusing. Finally, she agreed to meet him for a quick coffee one afternoon, when Julian was in meetings all day. It was a mistake, and she realized it as soon as she sat down at the table. Ethan was different, more confident, more direct. He talked about how he had changed, how he had grown, how he realized she had been the right person he had let slip away at the wrong time. Amy, I know you're married now, and I respect that. But I also know that not every marriage is what it seems from the outside. If any part of you still remembers what we had, if there's still a chance, however small, I want you to know that I'm here, ready to be the man I should have been years ago. Amelia was paralyzed, not knowing how to respond, because the truth was complicated. Her marriage to Julian had started as a lie but was becoming real. She was developing genuine feelings for a man who, in a few months, would no longer be her husband. And here was Ethan, offering a second chance at something that had once been simple and good. Ethan, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now. He held her hand across the table. Just think about it. And if you decide you want a chance to start something real without contracts or agreements, you know where to find me. It was at that exact moment that Julian walked into the cafe. He had left his meeting early, and after calling Amelia with no answer, had asked his driver to look for her in the places she frequented. And now here he was standing at the entrance, watching his wife holding hands with another man. The expression on Julian's face was like a punch to Amelia's stomach. Pain, anger, betrayal, all mixed in a look that lasted only seconds before he turned and walked out. Julian, wait. Amelia stood up abruptly, pulling her hand back, but he was already gone. She turned to Ethan, who was watching everything with an expression that mixed surprise and something more calculated. I have to go. Amy, he didn't even give you a chance to explain. Because there's nothing to explain beyond what he saw, and even though it looks that way, it's more complicated than you can imagine. She grabbed her bag, leaving money on the table. Ethan, thank you for the apology. But I'm in a different place now. In my life, in my head, in my heart, and I need to sort this out. She ran out, trying to find Julian on the busy streets of the West Village, but he was already gone. She hailed a cab back to the mansion, her heart pounding erratically, her mind trying to find the right words to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. When she arrived at the mansion, she found Julian in the library, shoving documents into a briefcase with sharp movements. She entered, closing the door behind her. Julian, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, he said without looking at her, his voice icy. You have every right to meet with whomever you want. Our contract doesn't specify personal exclusivity. It's not what you're thinking. And what am I thinking? He finally turned, and the pain in his eyes was like a blade. I'm thinking I saw my wife holding hands with another. A man who clearly means something to her. A man who can probably offer something I can't, something real. You are real, Amelia said, taking a step towards him. What's happening between us is real. Is it? Julian let out a bitter laugh. Or is it just convenient? You're stuck here for another 8 months. Maybe I'm just the best available option at the moment. How can you say that after everything? After our conversation? After what almost happened? Almost isn't enough, Amelia. Julian ran a hand through his hair, visibly trying to control himself. And maybe it's for the best. Maybe it's better if we remember what this really is. An agreement with an expiration date, nothing more. The words hurt more than Amelia expected. If that's what you want to believe. It's what I need to believe, because the alternative is much more complicated, and I already have enough complications dealing with my father, with the company, with everything. I can't add to that a wife who might still be in love with someone else. I'm not in love with Ethan, Amelia said firmly. He's part of my past. You are... I'm what? Julian asked, and there was desperation in his voice. Say it, Amelia. What am I to you? She looked at him, at this man who had entered her life as a cold stranger and had become someone she could no longer imagine being without. You're the person who makes me wish these 12 months would never end. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the doorbell. Mrs. Celia appeared at the door, clearly uncomfortable about interrupting. Excuse me, but there's a woman at the door. She says she needs to speak urgently with Mr. Sterling. Says it's about something very important. Julian exchanged a confused look with Amelia, before following Mrs. Celia to the entrance. Amelia followed, a bad feeling growing in her stomach. At the door was a woman Amelia recognized immediately from photos at corporate events. Veronica, Augustus's companion. But she didn't have her usual confident appearance. She was tearful, wearing dark glasses even though it was night, and carrying an infant who couldn't be more than a few months old. Julian, I need to talk to you, her voice trembled. It's about your father and about this child. Julian stood motionless for a moment, processing the scene before him. Veronica, the woman his father paraded at events like a trophy, was here on his doorstep, holding a child and with tears streaming from under her dark glasses. Amelia felt Julian's body tense beside her, and she instinctively placed a hand on his arm, a silent gesture of support. Veronica, what's going on? Julian asked, his voice controlled despite the evident confusion in his eyes. Why are you here with this child? Can I come in? Please. I can't talk about this at the door. Her voice was choked, desperate. Julian hesitated, but Amelia stepped forward. Come in. Let's talk inside. They headed to the living room, a less formal room than the library with comfortable sofas and a rarely used fireplace. Veronica sat down carefully, adjusting the sleeping child in her arms. It was a beautiful baby, with dark hair and delicate features. Amelia sat next to Julian, maintaining a closeness that made it clear they were a united front, despite recent tensions. Julian leaned forward, his hands clasped. Explain what's happening. Veronica took off her dark glasses, revealing red, swollen eyes. Your father and I were together for almost a year. You know that. What you don't know is that he made me promises. Said he was going to officially divorce your mother's memory, so to speak, and start a serious relationship with me. Said I would be the new Mrs. Sterling. Julian frowned. My father isn't one to make empty promises about relationships. He can barely commit to lunch appointments. Exactly, and I should have realized. Veronica looked down at the child in her arms. But then I got pregnant, and everything changed. The silence in the room was thick. Amelia felt the shock run through Julian like an electric wave. He became very still. The kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Are you saying this child is my father's? No, Veronica said, and something in her tone made Amelia's skin crawl. I'm saying your father believes he is. But he's not. Julian stood up abruptly, starting to pace the room. Veronica, you need to be very clear right now. What exactly are you trying to tell me? The woman took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. Augustus became obsessed with the idea of having another child. Said you weren't fulfilling your role of providing heirs for the family, that he needed a backup plan. When I found out I was pregnant, he assumed it was his, and I let him. But it's not his, Julian said slowly, processing. Whose is it then? No one who matters now. Veronica looked away. The biological father doesn't know she exists, and Augustus is convinced he's the father. He's been using it as leverage, says he'll acknowledge the child, that he'll change his will, that this child will have rights to the family inheritance. And he's been using it to control me, to keep me under his thumb. And why are you telling me this? Amelia asked, her voice firm but not hostile. Veronica finally looked at her, and there was real desperation in her eyes. Because Augustus is planning something big. I've overheard phone calls, seen documents. He's trying to publicly discredit Julian, prove your marriage is a sham and take control of the company from him. And he's going to use this child as proof that Julian isn't committed to the family, while he, Augustus, is ensuring the continuation of the lineage. Julian stopped pacing, turning to Veronica with hard eyes. And you decided to tell me this why? Out of the goodness of your heart, after participating in this whole charade? Because I'm tired, Veronica said, her voice breaking. Tired of being manipulated, of being used. Augustus doesn't love me. He never did. I'm just another piece on his board. And this child... She looked down at the baby in her arms. This child deserves better than to grow up as a weapon in the power games of a bitter man. Amelia felt a pang of empathy for the woman before her. Beneath the calculating exterior and bold dresses, Veronica was just another person caught in Augustus Sterling's web. What do you want from us? Julian asked, sitting back down but keeping his distance. Protection, the truth, a way out. Veronica wiped her tears. I'm willing to testify about everything I know, about Augustus's manipulations, about the conversations I overheard, about his plans. But I need guarantees that I'll be safe, that my daughter will be safe. Julian exchanged a look with Amelia. She could see the struggle happening inside him, suspicion warring with the need to protect what he had built. Amelia nodded slightly, a silent permission for him to trust his own judgment. I'll need proof, Julian said finally. Documents, recordings, anything concrete you have. Veronica picked up a small bag she had left on the floor. From inside, she pulled out a flash drive. It's all here, recorded conversations, copies of documents I took from his office when he wasn't looking. It's enough to expose the kind of man he really is. Julian took the flash drive, holding it as if it were a grenade about to explode. Why now? Why after all these months do you decide to do the right thing? Because yesterday he told me that once he got you out of the way, he wouldn't need me anymore, that he would take custody of the child and cut me out completely. Veronica closed her eyes. I realized I'm no longer useful to him, and people who aren't useful to Augustus Sterling simply disappear from his life as if they never existed. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Julian stood up. You can stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk to my lawyers and see how to proceed. But Veronica, if this is some kind of trap... It's not, I swear, she said, holding the child closer. I just want to get out of this situation with my daughter intact. Mrs. Celia, who had been standing discreetly at the entrance to the room, stepped forward. I'll prepare the room and get some things for the child. We have clothes from when the cook's nephew came to visit. After Veronica was led to the guest room, Julian and Amelia were left alone in the living room. He was still holding the flash drive, looking at it as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Your night of revelations is not going smoothly. Amelia tried a light joke to ease the tension. Julian let out a humorless laugh. My father has a supposed child who isn't actually his. He's trying to destroy me professionally, and now I have his mistress sleeping in the guest room with evidence that could blow everything up. No, definitely not a quiet night. He sat down heavily on the sofa, and Amelia could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. She moved closer, sitting beside him, closer than she had dared in days. Julian, about earlier, about what you saw at the cafe. Amelia, not now, he said, but not with anger, with weariness. I have too much to process. I know, but I need you to know that there's nothing between me and Ethan. He's part of a past that's not coming back. You are... She hesitated. You are my present. As complicated as it is, as much as it shouldn't be, you are where I want to be. Julian finally looked at her, really looked, and there was so much vulnerability in his eyes that Amelia's heart ached. Why? He asked softly. Why would you choose to stay here in all this mess, when you could have something simple with someone who doesn't come? With a broken family and a sociopathic father? Because simple doesn't mean right, and because when I look at you, I don't just see the mess. I see the man who stands up for his principles even when it would be easier to give in. I see the man who cares about making a difference, who fights for projects that can change lives. I see the man who gave me a chance to be more than I thought I could be. Amelia, he said her name like a prayer. I can't ask you to stay beyond the 12 months. It wouldn't be fair. You deserve freedom. You deserve to choose your own life without being tied to me and all this mess. What if I want to choose to stay? The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Julian raised a hand, hesitant, and touched her face with a delicacy that contrasted with all the tension of the moment. Do you know what you're saying? I do. Amelia placed her hand over his. I know it's complicated. I know your father will fight against it. I know there are real obstacles ahead. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. And that has to mean something. Julian closed his eyes as if fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, there was decision there. Then let's not let these complications decide for us. Let's decide together. After we deal with my father, after we resolve this situation, let's figure out what this between us can really be. Amelia smiled, and it was a genuine smile despite all the uncertainties. Together. Together, he repeated. And then, finally, he did what he had almost done that night in the library. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't how Amelia had imagined it would be. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was intense, urgent, as if all the months of tension and denial were being released at once. His hands were in her hair, on her face, pulling her closer. And she responded with equal intensity, clutching his shirt, letting years of repressed dreams and denied feelings finally have a voice through that kiss. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Julian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. I've wanted to do that for so long. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I started to feel something real for you, I wouldn't be able to let you go when the 12 months were over. And I thought it would be easier to keep my distance. And how's that strategy working out for you? Terribly, he admitted, smiling for the first time in days. Completely, terribly badly. They stayed like that for long minutes, simply absorbing each other's proximity, the reality of what had just happened. But reality had a cruel way of imposing itself, and Julian finally pulled away, looking at the flash drive in his hand. I need to see what's on here. I need to know exactly what my father is planning. I'll look with you, Amelia said, and it wasn't a request. Julian nodded, and together they went to his office on the 2nd floor. It was a room Amelia rarely entered, dominated by a large work desk, shelves full of business and architecture books, and an entire glass wall overlooking the illuminated garden. Julian connected the flash drive to the computer and began to browse the files. What they found was worse than they had imagined. There were recordings of conversations between Augustus and various contacts, discussing strategies to publicly discredit Julian. There were emails to investors, planting doubts about Julian's competence and the authenticity of his marriage. There was even a detailed plan to force a surprise audit on the company, with the aim of finding any irregularity that could be used against him. But what was most shocking was a document that appeared to be a new will. In it, Augustus left the majority of his assets and company shares to the supposed daughter, with Veronica as administrator until the child's majority. Julian would be reduced to a minority stake, effectively losing control of everything he had built. He's really trying to destroy me, Julian said, his voice thick with a mixture of pain and anger. It's not just about business. It's personal. He wants to punish me for not being the son he wanted, for not being like him. Amelia held his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. We won't let that happen. We have proof now. We can fight this. But at what cost? Julian looked at her. If we make this public, it will become a scandal. It will affect you too, Amelia. They'll investigate our marriage. They'll question everything. Then let them question, she said firmly. The truth is, our marriage may have started as an agreement, but it has become real. And that's what matters. Julian pulled her into a hug, and Amelia felt the tension in his body slowly dissolve. They stayed like that for long minutes, drawing strength from each other until exhaustion finally caught up with them. For the first time since they were married, they slept together, not in the full physical sense, but sharing the same space. Julian fell asleep on the office sofa, exhausted by the weight of the revelations, and Amelia curled up beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. It was uncomfortable, not at all romantic, but it was real, and in that moment, it was all they needed. The morning brought new challenges. Julian woke up early and immediately started making calls, first to his lawyers, then to a few trusted allies on the company's board. Amelia could hear him from the bedroom, his voice firm and controlled, laying out the situation and beginning to mount his defense. Veronica appeared for breakfast looking more rested, the child in her arms. Mrs. Celia had arranged for clothes and diapers, and the baby was clean and fed. Amelia joined them in the kitchen, observing the woman who just yesterday had seemed like an enemy and was now an unlikely ally. "How are you?" Amelia asked, pouring coffee. "Scared, relieved, confused," Veronica admitted. "I spent so much time playing games trying to position myself in the best way that I forgot what it's like to just be honest. It's strange." "I understand more than you know." Veronica looked at her with curiosity. "You and Julian, are you real? I mean, I know it started as a deal. I heard Augustus mention it, but now are you real?" Amelia hesitated, but then decided on honesty. "We're becoming real. It's complicated and scary, but yes, it's real." "He's lucky," Veronica said softly. "Julian was always different from his father. He always had a heart that Augustus tried to crush. I'm glad he found someone who sees that." Before Amelia could reply, Julian entered the kitchen. "Meeting at 11 with the lawyers. They're going to review all the material and prepare a strategy. Veronica, you'll need to give an official statement." "I'm ready," she said with determination. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The mansion filled with lawyers, consultants, and advisors. Veronica spent hours being interviewed, her testimony recorded and documented. The evidence from the flash drive was analyzed, authenticated, and prepared for legal use. Amelia stayed by Julian's side throughout the process, her presence silent but constant. She didn't understand all the legal details, but she understood what was at stake. The life Julian had built, the projects he believed in, everything was on the line. It was mid-afternoon when the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Celia answered and returned with a worried expression. "It's Mr. Augustus. He's demanding to be let in." Julian became very still. "Let him in. It's time to face him." Augustus Sterling entered the living room as if he owned the place, which technically he had at one point. He was impeccable as always, expensive suit, perfectly combed hair, but there was something different in his eyes, a coldness even deeper than usual. "Julian, Amelia, what an unexpected pleasure," his tone was sarcastic. "I hear you're having an interesting meeting here today, with my lawyers no less." "Ex-lawyers," Julian corrected, standing up. "They work for me now, as does the entire team you thought you controlled." Augustus let out a humorless chuckle. "You think you can challenge me? You who only got where you are because of the name I built?" "I got where I am despite you," Julian said, and there was a strength in his voice Amelia had never heard before. "Despite your constant interference, your suffocating control, your inability to see value in anything that doesn't generate immediate profit." "Watch what you say, boy." Augustus took a threatening step. "I can still destroy everything you've built. You can try. But unlike you, I didn't build my legacy on lies and manipulation." It was at that moment that Veronica appeared at the door, the child in her arms. Augustus froze upon seeing her, his expression shifting from surprise to anger in seconds. "What are you doing here?" "Telling the truth," Veronica said, her voice trembling but firm. "About everything. About your plans, your manipulations, and about this child." Augustus looked at the baby, and something in his expression changed. "That's my daughter. My heir." You have no right to take her from me." "She is not yours," Veronica said, and the words fell like a bomb. "She never was. You only assumed she was because it was convenient for your plans. But the truth is she has nothing to do with you, and I have proof of that." The silence that followed was absolute. Augustus turned pale, his hands trembling slightly before clenching into fists. "You're lying." "I'm not. And there's a DNA test being processed right now to prove it." Veronica took a step forward. "You used me. You tried to use this child. You tried to use everyone around you to maintain your control. But it's over, Augustus." The older man looked around the room at the lawyers, at Julian, at Amelia, and finally seemed to understand that he had lost. His expression hardened, but there was defeat in his eyes. "You will regret this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "All of you." "We won't," Julian said calmly, "because for the first time, I'm doing what's right, not what's convenient. And that's something you've never been able to understand." Augustus left without another word, but the tension he left behind lingered in the air like toxic smoke. Julian sat down heavily, running his hands over his face. Amelia approached, placing her hands on his shoulders. "It's over," she said, softly. "You stood firm. You told the truth." "It's not over yet," Julian looked at her. "He'll retaliate. He'll try to destroy my reputation publicly. He'll use our marriage against us." "Then we'll face it together," Amelia said. "Because we're not a lie anymore, we're real, and the truth is always stronger than manipulation." Julian took her hand, kissing her fingers. "How did you get so strong?" "I learned from you," she replied, smiling. In the days that followed, everything Julian had predicted came to pass. Augustus launched a public campaign against his son, using his media contacts to plant stories about mismanagement, about the arranged marriage, about supposed financial irregularities. The headlines were cruel, the comments on social media even worse. But Julian wasn't alone this time. He had Veronica willing to testify. He had documented proof of Augustus's manipulations. He had allies on the company's board who had always respected his work, and he had Amelia, who refused to hide, appearing by his side at every interview, every event, publicly demonstrating their unity. The media, of course, loved the scandal. The heir who defied the patriarch, the wife who chose to stay, the mistress who revealed the truth. It was the kind of story that sold magazines and generated clicks. The media storm lasted for 3 intense weeks, 3 weeks in which every detail of Julian and Amelia's life was dissected, analyzed, and judged by the public. Television shows debated the ethics of arranged marriages. Magazines speculated on the authenticity of their feelings. Social media was divided between supporters and critics. But something unexpected happened during this period of brutal exposure. The truth about Augustus's manipulations began to surface. The documents Veronica had provided, the recordings, the emails, all were carefully leaked to reliable press outlets. And the more the truth emerged, the more the narrative changed. Julian was no longer seen as the rebellious son, but was recognized as the man of integrity who refused to play by his father's dirty games. The sustainable housing project, which Augustus had tried to cancel, became a symbol of the difference between the old business guard and a new generation committed to social responsibility. Investors who had previously hesitated now approached, interested in associating their brands with something positive. And Amelia, with her genuine knowledge and passion for design with purpose, became an eloquent spokesperson for this vision. It was on a November morning, as the first summer rains began to fall over New York, that everything changed definitively. Julian received a call from his lead lawyer with news that would make history in the Sterling family. The company's board of directors had voted. By an overwhelming majority, Augustus was being removed from all his executive positions, retaining only a minority shareholding. Julian would assume full control of operations, but along with the professional victory came a complex personal loss. Augustus, the man who had always seemed indestructible, was found in his apartment in a state of emotional collapse. His life was not in danger, but doctors diagnosed severe burnout, and recommended an immediate withdrawal from all stressful activities. The business titan, who had built an empire based on absolute control, had finally been defeated by the weight of his own manipulations. Julian received the news with a mixture of feelings that Amelia could clearly read on his face: relief for the victory, sadness for his father's fall, guilt for feeling both at the same time. She found him in the library that afternoon, looking out the window at the garden where the rain was falling softly. "Are you okay?" she asked, approaching him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent years wishing my father would stop controlling every aspect of my life, and now that I've succeeded, all I feel is emptiness. He's my father, Amelia. As bad as he is, he's still my father." She held his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "You didn't cause this. He caused this to himself with his choices, but it's still valid for you to feel sad. Love and hurt can coexist, especially when it comes to family." Julian pulled her into a hug, hiding his face in her hair. "What would I do without you?" "You'll never have to find out," she promised. But even with the professional victory secured and her relationship with Julian strengthening every day, there was a question that hung between them like a shadow: the marriage contract. There were only 4 months left until the 12-month term ended, and although both had expressed real feelings, neither had directly addressed what would happen when that date arrived. It was Chloe, Amelia's best friend, who finally forced the conversation. She visited the mansion on a Saturday afternoon while Julian was at the office dealing with issues of the power transition in the company. The two friends sat in the garden drinking lemonade while watching the birds at the feeders Amelia had installed weeks ago. "Amy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest," Chloe said, placing her glass on the iron table. "What's going to happen when the 12 months are up?" Amelia was silent for a moment, watching the leaves move with the wind. "I don't know. We haven't talked about it yet." "You need to talk. Because from the outside, it's obvious to anyone that you're in love with him. And from the way he looks at you, it's obvious he feels the same. But without a real conversation about the future, you two are just postponing the inevitable." "I'm scared," Amelia admitted softly. "Scared that he won't want to continue. Scared that all of this was just convenient for him while he dealt with his father's situation. Scared of being alone in this." "But you're not alone. You saw how he fought for you during this whole scandal, how he defended you, how he kept you by his side in every difficult moment. That's not the behavior of someone who's just fulfilling a contract." Amelia knew her friend was right, but fear was a powerful force, and the idea of having that conversation, of risking the fragile balance they had built, paralyzed her. The decision to finally address the issue was taken out of her hands in an unexpected way. A week after her conversation with Chloe, Amelia was working in the office Julian had set up for her in the mansion when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered. "Amelia?" It was Ethan. She felt her stomach clench. They hadn't spoken since that disastrous day at the cafe. "Ethan, how did you get my number?" "That doesn't matter." He sounded different, colder. "We need to talk, in person." "I don't think that's a good idea." "I'm not asking. There are things you need to know, about your husband, about this whole situation, things that will change your perspective on everything. Ethan, whatever you have to say, you can say it now. Not on the phone. Tomorrow, 3 in the afternoon, at the same cafe where we met before. If you care at all about the truth, you'll be there." He hung up before she could respond. Amelia stared at the phone, a bad feeling growing in her stomach. Should she tell Julian, but tell him what exactly? That her ex-boyfriend wanted to meet and claimed to have important information? After everything they had been through with Augustus's manipulations, Julian was finally finding some peace. She didn't want to add more worries without knowing what it was about. It was a mistake. She realized it the moment she saw Ethan waiting at the cafe the next day. He wasn't alone. Beside him was an older man Amelia didn't recognize, wearing glasses and holding a folder of documents. "Amy, thanks for coming," Ethan said, but his tone wasn't friendly. "This is Frederick Myers. He's a financial consultant and a private investigator." Amelia felt her blood run cold. "What is this about?" Frederick opened the folder, pushing some documents towards her. Mrs. Sterling, I have information about your husband that I believe you should be aware of. Information about the real reasons behind your marriage. I already know the reasons, Amelia said coldly, and I don't see how this is any of your business. You know what Julian told you, Frederick continued, but do you know the whole truth? Do you know, for example, that he investigated your family for months before making the marriage proposal, that he knew exactly how much your mother owed, the exact amount of your father's medical bills? Amelia looked at the documents. They were detailed investigation reports about her family, dated 2 months before Julian made the proposal. Her heart started to beat faster. This doesn't prove anything other than the fact that he was careful. It proves he chose you because you were vulnerable. Ethan leaned forward. He chose you because he knew you'd have no choice but to accept. You weren't chosen because you were special, Amy. You were chosen because you were desperate. The words hurt more than Amelia wanted to admit, but she maintained her composure. Even if that's true, even if he investigated me, it doesn't change what we've built since. It doesn't. Frederick pulled out another document. What about this? It's a copy of an agreement Julian made with his father a year ago, an agreement that stipulated that if Julian could maintain a stable marriage for at least 18 months, Augustus would transfer majority control of the company to him. Your marriage wasn't just about appearances for investors. It was a condition for his inheritance. Amelia felt as if the floor was disappearing from under her feet. She looked at the documents, at Julian's signature at the bottom, at the clauses detailing exactly what he would gain by fulfilling the terms. 18 months, not 12. The contract between them said 12 months, but the agreement with Augustus required 18. He was planning to convince you to stay beyond the original 12 months, Ethan said, and there was something that seemed like genuine concern in his voice, but also triumph. All this romance, these developed feelings, it was all calculated from the start to keep you trapped long enough for him to get what he really wanted. Amelia stood up abruptly, her legs trembling. I don't believe you. The documents don't lie, Frederick said calmly. And there's more. Do you want to know who funded this investigation? Who paid me to find all this out? She looked at Ethan, and the truth was revealed in his eyes even before he spoke. Someone who is very interested in destroying Julian Sterling, Ethan said. Someone who approached me months ago when they learned that you and I had a history. Someone who offered me a generous sum to get close to you again and create problems in Julian's perfect marriage. Augustus, Amelia whispered. The man himself, Ethan confirmed. But even though I was paid to do it, Amy, the feelings I expressed were real. I truly regret leaving you. And when I found out the truth about Julian, about how he used you, I wanted to protect you. By offering information that will destroy my marriage, by working for the man who tried to destroy Julian in every possible way. Amelia grabbed the documents from the table, stuffing them into her bag. I don't know what's real in these papers and what's a forgery, but I know that you two are pathetic. You, Ethan, who sold yourself to a bitter man seeking revenge, and you, Frederick, who profits from destroying lives. She left the cafe without looking back, but her hands were trembling as she drove back to the mansion. Her brain was in a whirlwind, trying to process what she had seen. Could it be true? Had Julian really investigated her so thoroughly? Was their marriage just another piece in an elaborate game to gain control of the company? When she arrived at the mansion, she found Julian in the library, working on his laptop. He smiled when she entered, a warm smile that made her heart ache painfully. Hi, I thought you'd be back later. He noticed her expression. Did something happen? Amelia placed her bag on the table, taking a deep breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I always am. He closed the laptop, giving her his full attention. What is it? Did you investigate me before you made the marriage proposal? Did you know about my family's debts, my father's medical problems, about exactly how vulnerable I was? Julian became very still. His face paled slightly. Where did you hear this? Is it true? Amelia insisted. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. Yes, I investigated you. I needed to know who I was doing business with. Business, Amelia repeated the word with bitterness. That's what I was to you. A business deal. No, you don't understand. Julian took a step toward her, but she backed away. Yes, I investigated you. Yes, I knew about your situation, but that's not why I chose you. No? Then why was it? Because when we met at that charity event months before I made the proposal, you impressed me. We only talked for 10 minutes about a social housing project being presented, but you spoke with such passion, such knowledge that I couldn't forget you. The investigation came later, yes, but it was to ensure you were who I thought you were, not to manipulate you. Amelia pulled the documents from her bag, throwing them on the table. And what about the deal with your father, the deal that said you needed to maintain a marriage for 18 months, not 12, to gain control of the company? Julian looked at the documents, his jaw tensing. Who gave you this? Does it matter? Is it true? He sighed deeply. Yes, there was such an agreement. My father made that demand a year ago. But Amelia, listen. When I made the contract with you, I specified 12 months because I was already planning to break the agreement with my father. I didn't want to trap you for longer than necessary. The idea was to complete the 12 months, release you, and then deal with the consequences with my father however I had to. But then things changed, Amelia said, her voice filled with pain. You started to develop feelings, or at least pretended to, because you realized it would be more convenient to keep me around. It would be easier for me to stay voluntarily than to have to fight with your father. No, Julian said vehemently. The feelings weren't faked. Every moment, every conversation, every time I looked at you and saw not just the beautiful woman you are, but the incredible, talented, strong person underneath, all of it was real. How can I believe that? Amelia felt tears burn her eyes. How can I know what's real and what's manipulation? You admitted you investigated me, admitted there were secret agreements, admitted you planned everything meticulously. At what point exactly did I stop being a piece on your chessboard and become a real person to you? From the very first day. Julian took a step toward her. Amelia, I swear, from the moment you entered my life, even when I tried to keep my distance, even when I feigned indifference, you were always real to me. That's why I was so scared. That's why I pulled away when you mentioned Ethan. Because I realized I was feeling things I shouldn't, that I was seeing you as much more than a business deal. Amelia shook her head, tears now falling freely. I believed in you. I believed that what we were building was genuine. But how can I trust anything now? How can I know that every word, every gesture, every kiss wasn't just part of a bigger plan? Because I love you, Julian said, and the words fell between them like a bomb. I love you, Amelia. Not as part of a plan, not as a business strategy, but really and completely. And I know I screwed up by not being fully transparent from the beginning, but if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that this is real. The silence that followed was thick and painful. Amelia wanted to believe. Every fiber of her being wanted to believe those words, but the pain of betrayal, of discovering there were layers of manipulation she didn't know about, was too strong. I need time, she said finally. I need to process all of this, away from here, away from you. Amelia, please. No. She held his hand when he tried to get closer. Not now. You asked me to trust you, to build something real with you, and I did. But now I've found out there were secrets, investigations, agreements you never mentioned. I need space to figure out what's still real amidst all of this. How long? Julian asked, and there was desperation in his voice. I don't know. She picked up her bag. I'm going to stay with Chloe for a few days, or weeks. I don't know, I just know I can't be here, right? Now. She left before he could answer, before her own resolve could falter. On the way to Chloe's apartment, she cried so much she had to pull the car over twice to compose herself. Everything she thought she had built, all the certainty she had found in recent months, seemed to have been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Chloe welcomed her without questions, simply hugging her friend and letting her cry until she had no more tears. It was only later, as they sat on the small apartment sofa sharing a bottle of wine, that Amelia told her everything. Chloe, how could I have been so naive? Amelia said, curled up in the corner of the sofa. I thought I had finally found something real, something worthwhile, and it was all part of an elaborate game. "Did you hear his side of it?" Chloe asked gently. "I did. He said he loves me, that the feelings are real. But how can I believe that when I find out he investigated me as if I were a business target, when there are secret agreements he never mentioned?" "Amy, I'm going to tell you something you might not want to hear." Chloe held her friend's hand. "People make mistakes, even when they're in love. Julian was wrong not to be transparent from the beginning. But that doesn't mean his feelings are fake. I've seen you two together, remember? I've seen how he looks at you. That's not something you can fake. But what if it is? What if he's so good at manipulating that even the feelings seem real? Then you need to answer one question. Do you love him?" Amelia was silent for a long moment. "Yes," she whispered finally. "I love him, and that makes everything even more painful." "Because real love hurts when it's wounded," Chloe said softly, "but it also has the power to heal. The question is, are you willing to give him the chance to heal what he broke?" The weeks that followed were the hardest Amelia had ever faced. She continued to work on the sustainable housing project remotely, but she refused all of Julian's requests to talk in person. He sent messages daily, not asking for forgiveness or making promises, just sharing his day, his thoughts, small moments he wanted to share with her. It was painfully sweet and terribly confusing. It was during this time that Amelia discovered something that would change everything. She was reviewing project documents when she found a folder she didn't recognize in her email. It was from Frederick Myers, the investigator Ethan had brought to the cafe. The message was brief. "I thought you should know the whole truth. Not everything I showed you was true." Inside the folder were recordings of conversations between Frederick, Ethan, and Augustus. And the more Amelia listened, the more the truth revealed itself. Yes, Julian had investigated her, that was true, but the 18-month agreement with Augustus had been forged. Frederick admitted in the recordings that Augustus had paid him to create false documents, to plant doubts in Amelia's mind, to destroy the marriage from the inside out, since all external attempts had failed. Ethan, in the recordings, questioned the morality of the plan, but Augustus was relentless. "If I can't destroy my son publicly, I'll destroy what he values most. And clearly, what he values most now is this woman." Amelia felt sick listening to those words. Augustus had gone so far in his thirst for revenge that he was willing to manipulate even his son's most intimate feelings, and she had fallen right into the trap, believing false documents, doubting the man she loved. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and called Julian. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for the call. Amelia. Just her name, but filled with so much emotion that she felt her heart clench. "I need to see you. Now. Can you come to Chloe's apartment? I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, he was at the door. He looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes and an unshaven face, but when his eyes met hers, there was so much love there that Amelia wondered how she had ever doubted. "I saw the recordings," she said, as soon as he entered. "The recordings of your father planning everything with Frederick and Ethan. The documents were fake. The 18-month agreement never existed." Julian closed his eyes, a sigh of relief escaping him. "I tried to tell you, but you didn't believe me. And I'm so sorry for that." Amelia took a step toward him. "But Julian, even if the documents were fake, you still investigated me. There were still secrets between us. I know, and I will always carry that guilt." He opened his eyes, looking directly at her. "But, Amelia, I need you to understand something. When I investigated you, it was before I really knew you. It was when you were just a possibility, a candidate for a role. But the moment we talked at that event, the moment I saw the passion in your eyes when you spoke about design, you stopped being a candidate and became the only person I could imagine by my side. And yes, I should have told you about the investigation. I should have been transparent from the start, but I was afraid you would refuse if you knew how calculated it all was at the beginning." "I would have refused," Amelia admitted, If you had told me everything at the beginning, I would have refused out of pride. But now, after everything we've been through together, after seeing who you really are beneath the masks, I would choose to stay even knowing everything. Even knowing I started this the wrong way. Especially because of that. She approached him, placing her hands on his face. Because you could have kept the secrets. You could have let me believe you were perfect. But you admitted your mistakes, you owned your flaws, and that's more real than any fairy tale romance. Julian pulled her into a tight hug, hiding his face in her hair. I love you so much it's scary. So much I don't know how I survived these weeks without you. I love you too, Amelia whispered, and I want to stay. Not out of obligation, not because of a contract, but because I choose you. I choose us. He pulled away just enough to look into her eyes. The 12 months are up in 2 months. We can tear up the contract now. We can start over the right way. No financial agreements, no deadlines, just 2 people who love each other building a life together. Amelia smiled through her tears. Then let's do it. Let's start over. Julian kissed her, and it was different from all the previous kisses. It didn't have the urgency of desperation, nor the hesitation of uncertainty. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, that marked a new beginning. The following months were about rebuilding. They tore up the original marriage contract and symbolically wrote a new one. Not a legal contract, but a list of handwritten promises. Promises of honesty, of transparency, of always choosing each other even when it was difficult. They posted the list on the refrigerator, where they saw it every day. The sustainable housing project was successfully completed, and the first phase was inaugurated 6 months after their reconciliation. Amelia played a key role in the design, and her name was officially credited as the lead creative consultant. It was the first time her talent was publicly recognized, and she couldn't stop smiling throughout the inauguration event. Augustus, surprisingly, started attending therapy after his breakdown. The doctors had been clear. He needed to change or the stress would kill him. The changes were slow and difficult, but he made genuine efforts to reconnect with Julian, to understand his son rather than control him. There was still tension between them, there probably always would be, but there were also attempts to build something new. Veronica moved on with her life, relocating to upstate New York, where she raised her daughter away from the spotlight. Julian helped financially, not out of obligation, but because he recognized she had done the right thing by exposing Augustus's manipulations. The girl would grow up without knowing the role she almost played in the Sterling family's power games. Ethan disappeared after the recordings were exposed. The last news Amelia heard was that he had moved to Los Angeles, trying to start over far from the consequences of his choices. She didn't feel anger toward him, only sadness for what he had become, for what Augustus's money had turned him into. It was on a December night, almost a year after their reconciliation, that Julian did something Amelia didn't expect. They were in the mansion's garden, under the rare starry sky of New York when he knelt before her. Amelia, I've asked you to marry me once before. It was part of a business deal, it was calculated and cold. But today, I want to do it the right way. He took a box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring with a solitaire diamond. I love you, not for convenience, not for business, but because you are the most incredible person I have ever met. You challenged me, you changed me, you showed me it's possible to build something with meaning. Will you marry me again? Not for 12 months, not for 18, but forever? Amelia was crying, but they were tears of pure happiness. Yes, yes, I will. He placed the ring on her finger, and they kissed under the stars, surrounded by the plants she had carefully chosen for the garden, in the house that was no longer just his but theirs. The second ceremony took place 3 months later, on a March morning, as autumn began to paint New York in golden hues. It was different from the first in every way. Small, intimate, with only close family and true friends. No strategically placed cameras, no assistants controlling every detail. Just 2 people who chose to be there, who chose each other above all else. Amelia wore a simple dress she had chosen herself, with no styling teams. Her father, now recovered and strong, walked her down the makeshift aisle in the mansion's garden. Julian was waiting there, and when their eyes met, they both smiled through tears. The vows were written by them, words that came from the heart, and not from assistance. Julian promised to always be honest, to always see her as an equal partner, to always value not just her beauty, but her mind and her heart. Amelia promised to always challenge him, to always support him, to always remind him that love is not control, it is shared freedom. When the officiant declared them married, the kiss was long and sweet, witnessed by people who truly cared about them. And unlike the first ceremony, where everything had been cold and calculated, this one was warmed by genuine love. Life after that was not perfect. There were still challenges, arguments, moments of doubt, but they faced them together, always returning to the promises they had made, always choosing to communicate rather than withdraw. Amelia opened her own design studio 2 years after their second wedding. She called it Spaces with Soul, focusing on projects that united aesthetics and social purpose. Her work gained recognition, awards, and respect from the industry, but more importantly, it brought her the satisfaction of seeing her drawings, which had been hidden in a sketchbook for so long, transform into real spaces that improved people's lives. Julian continued to expand the company's vision of sustainability, turning Sterling Properties into a benchmark for green construction. He and Amelia often collaborated on projects, their professional partnership as strong as their personal one. 5 years after their second wedding, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them with joy, mixed with a touch of healthy fear. But when she placed her hand on her still flat stomach and looked at Julian, she saw in his eyes all the love she needed to see. "We're going to do this right," he said, placing his hand over hers. "We're going to raise this child with love, honesty, freedom, everything I didn't have growing up. And we'll teach them that mistakes don't define who we are," Amelia added. "That it's possible to start over, that it's possible to turn something that started wrong into something beautiful." Their daughter was born on a spring morning, with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Eleanor, in honor of Julian's mother, the woman he always said would have loved Amelia. Augustus met his granddaughter with tears in his eyes, holding little Eleanor with a gentleness Julian had never seen in his father. "It's a new beginning," the older man said, his voice hoarse, "a chance to do better." And as Amelia watched 3 generations of the Sterling family together, she saw something she had never imagined when she signed that cold contract years ago. She saw healing, she saw transformation, she saw love. The life that had begun as a business transaction had transformed into something no contract could capture. It had become a home, a family, a love that grew stronger every day. Years later, when Eleanor was 7 and had a younger brother named Gabriel, Amelia was in her studio working on a new project when she found the old sketchbook, the one she had kept in her nightstand drawer during those first lonely months in the mansion. She flipped through the pages, seeing the projects that were once just dreams on paper. Many of them had become reality, not just the rooms, but the life she had imagined she could have. And at the end of the sketchbook she found something she had forgotten, a page where, in a moment of despair in those early months, she had written a single sentence: "One day this will mean something." Amelia smiled, picked up a pen, and added underneath in a more mature, more confident handwriting, "And it means everything." She closed the sketchbook and looked out the window of her studio. Outside she could see Julian playing with the children in the garden, chasing them among the plants she had chosen, their laughter filling the air. Mrs. Celia watched from the porch, smiling with the kind of satisfaction of someone who sees a family she helped raise thrive. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned, not the life she signed up for in a contract, but the life she chose to build, brick by brick, decision by decision, love by love. The marriage that had started as a sham had become the most real truth of her life. The man who had treated her as an object had learned to love her as a partner, and she, who had entered that mansion as an irrelevant shadow, had become the light that illuminated every corner of that house. Amelia placed the sketchbook in her office drawer, not hidden this time, but preserved as a reminder of where they started and how far they had come. And then she went out to join her family in the garden, to live another moment of the extraordinary life. They had built together. He had treated her as an object. She had taught him how to love, and together they had built not an empire, but something far more valuable. They had built a home. They had built a family. They had built a love that proved that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Amelia and Julian has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, from a marriage that began as a contract and became true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Was it Amelia's courage in rebuilding her life? Julian's transformation from a cold man into a devoted husband? Or perhaps the message that it's never too late to start over, to choose love over convenience? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that true love can be born from the most unlikely places. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you believe in the power of love and transformation.